The night was colder than usual. The kind of night when even the strongest fire inside a home could not chase away the chill completely. A soft wind blew through the empty streets, carrying dry leaves that scraped along the stone ground. The little town was silent, most people asleep in their warm beds. But one man sat alone by the small wooden table in his house. He was a widower, a man who had lost his wife many years ago. His house was quiet, too quiet, and sometimes the silence felt heavier than the winter air itself. The man lived simply. His clothes were worn. His boots had holes, and the bread on his table was his last for the week. Still, he managed. He worked in the day, saved what little he could. And at night, he sat with his old lamp, thinking of days long gone. There was no one to share his stories with, no family to laugh with, no voice to answer when he spoke aloud by mistake. He had learned to live with loneliness. But it was a burden that never truly left on this night. As the man rested his tired head on the table, a faint sound broke the silence. At first, he thought it was only the wind pressing against the shutters. But then it came again, a small cry, soft and strange. It was not the cry of a cat or the bark of a dog. It was something different, something uncertain. It made the hair on his arms stand up. The man frowned and slowly stood up. His old knees ached as he walked toward the door. He listened carefully, holding his breath. Yes. There it was again, a weak cry, trembling in the air like the voice of someone lost. The sound tugged at something inside him, a mix of fear and curiosity. He hesitated, wondering if it was wise to open the door in the middle of such a night. But the sound came again, softer now, almost as if fading. He reached for the iron handle and pulled. The cold rushed in at once, biting at his skin. The night outside was darker than ink, the only light coming from the pale moon that hung low in the sky. At first, he saw nothing, only the empty street and drifting snow. Then, in the shadow of his doorway, he noticed a figure, small and thin. Trembling against the wall, his eyes widened. For a moment, he could not understand what he was seeing. It was a woman, or at least she seemed like one. But not like any woman he had ever known. Her skin shimmered faintly, pale and marked with faint glowing lines. Her eyes were larger than human eyes, shining with a strange sadness, and in her weak arms, she clutched a tiny bundle wrapped in torn cloth. The bundle moved, and the man heard the same cry again. High and fragile, it was a baby. The man froze. His heart pounded as a dozen questions rushed through his head. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why was she here? Yet even in his shock, he could see the truth. She was helpless. She was starving. Her face was hollow, her lips dry. Her hands shook so badly he feared she might drop the baby. She lifted her gaze to him, and though she did not speak, her eyes begged in a language deeper than words. She stepped forward weakly and lowered the bundle to the ground. The baby whimpered, tiny fingers pushing through the cloth. The alien mother bent her head, as if ashamed, then looked at the man one last time. Her eyes glistened with tears. She touched the baby's face softly, then slowly stepped back. Her whole body shook, as if the effort of standing was too much. The man's throat went dry. He wanted to ask her something, anything, but no words came. He wanted to call for help, yet he stood frozen. The alien mother raised a trembling hand as if to say goodbye. Her lips parted, but only a faint, broken sound escaped. Then she turned, her steps weak, her figure swaying like a shadow ready to fall. The man looked down at the baby on his doorstep, so small, so fragile. The child's eyes opened for a brief moment, dark and wide, staring at him as though asking if he would turn away. His chest tightened. He felt the cold wind on his face. But inside his heart, a warmth began to stir. The night had brought him something unexpected, something that would change his life forever. A helpless alien mother and her child had come to his door. And in that single moment, the silence of his lonely life was broken. The man stood at the doorway, torn between fear and compassion, knowing that whatever choice he made tonight, it would follow him for the rest of his days. The man's hands trembled as he stared at the baby lying on his doorstep. The cries were no longer strange now. They were cries of life, cries of hunger, cries of helplessness, the kind that pierced straight into the heart. He had heard babies cry before, long ago, when his own child had lived. Before fate had taken both mother and child away from him. That sound, forgotten but buried deep inside his memory, returned now with a force that made his chest ache. He bent down slowly, his knees stiff in the cold. His fingers brushed the edge of the cloth. It was thin. Almost useless against the freezing night, the baby's small hand reached out, clumsy and weak, closing around nothing but air. The man swallowed hard. The baby's skin was soft, but cooler than it should have been. Without thinking, he pulled the child into his arms. Wrapping the cloth tighter, his heart thudded louder than the howling wind. The alien mother stood a few steps away. She swayed as though every breath was a battle. Her eyes locked onto his, glowing faintly in the moonlight. They were not the eyes of a monster. They were the eyes of a mother, filled with worry and pain. She lifted her trembling hands slightly, as though she wanted to take the child back. But her strength failed her, and her arms fell again. She looked at him with a silent question. Would he help? Would he turn them away? The man's instincts screamed for caution. The world was full of warnings, stories of strange beings. Dangerous visitors from beyond. People in the town whispered about them whenever strange lights flashed in the sky. The rules were clear: report anything unusual. Never take chances. But as he looked at the baby, small and fragile against his chest, the rules seemed meaningless. What kind of man would shut the door on a child? No matter where it came from, he stepped back into his house. Holding the baby close, the alien mother gasped. A soft sound that broke in the air for a moment. He thought she feared he was stealing her child. So he stopped, standing in the doorway, and lifted the baby slightly. Showing he meant no harm, her glowing eyes softened. She took a stumbling step forward, but collapsed to her knees. The man rushed to her side, still clutching the baby with one arm. Up close, he could see how thin she was. Her face was hollow, her cheeks sunken. Every rib showed through her strange but fragile body. Her breath came in shallow rasps. She had been starving, maybe for days. Her arms shook as she tried to reach for the baby, but she could not lift them high enough. The man crouched beside her, balancing the child carefully. He wanted to say something, to offer comfort. But he knew she would not understand. Still, his voice came, low and steady. "You're safe here," though she could not understand the words. She seemed to understand the tone. Her eyes glistened with fresh tears. She pressed her forehead lightly against the floor, as if thanking him in the only way she knew. The man felt a shiver run through him, not from the cold this time, but from the weight of what had just happened. A creature not of his world had trusted him enough to leave her baby in his care. He helped her stand and guided her into the house. The warmth of the fire greeted them, though it was not much. He laid the baby gently on a folded blanket near the fire and returned with a piece of bread and a cup of water. The alien mother looked at the food with wide eyes. Her hands shook as she took the bread. Sniffing at first, then nibbling carefully. She chewed slowly, then broke a small piece off and pressed it against her child's lips. The baby made a weak noise, then suckled on the bread's edge. The man's throat tightened at the sight. A mother who had nothing still chose to feed her child first. It was a language of sacrifice he understood all too well. For a moment, the silence between them became something greater. They were no longer strangers, no longer human and alien. They were two souls, bound by the simple truth of care. The alien mother ate the rest of the bread quickly, as though afraid it might disappear. The water she drank in small sips, her throat raw. The man sat quietly across from her, the fire flickering between them. He studied her movements, cautious but grateful. Every now and then she looked at him, her eyes full of questions she could not ask, but also full of trust she could not hide. The baby stirred again, whimpering. The man leaned closer, gently rocking the child in his arms. The mother watched him, and something shifted in her gaze. It was no longer only fear or desperation, it was relief. It was the look of someone who realized she was no longer alone. Outside, the cold night carried on, silent and merciless. But inside that small house, warmth was returning not only from the fire, but from something far deeper. The discovery had been made. Not just of a helpless alien mother and her child, but of something greater. A chance for one lonely man to open his door, and in doing so, to open his heart once more. The fire crackled softly in the corner of the small house. Its light threw long shadows across the walls. Wrapping the room in a fragile sense of safety, the man sat near the fire, holding the alien baby close to his chest. The child was still weak, but the tiny breaths rising and falling against his shirt told him the little one was alive. The alien mother sat on the floor across from him, her back against the wall. Her body looked as though it could collapse at any moment, but her glowing eyes never left her child. She did not speak, but she did not need to. Her gaze was a language of its own. It was heavy with fear, but also heavy with hope. Each time she looked at the baby, her lips trembled each time her eyes met his. It was as if she begged silently, "Do not turn us away. Do not let us die in the cold." The man tried to push back the questions rising in his mind. What if someone saw them? What if the town discovered he was hiding an alien in his home? They would call him a fool, maybe even worse. They would tell him to hand them over, to protect himself. But when he looked down at the small baby nestled in his arms, those thoughts seemed cruel. How could he abandon something so helpless? The mother slowly lifted her hand, pointing weakly toward the child. Her fingers shook, but her meaning was clear. She wanted to hold her baby. The man hesitated, but then carefully leaned forward, passing the bundle into her arms. She clutched the baby close, rocking gently. Her body shook as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. She pressed her lips against the child's forehead, murmuring faint sounds, soft and broken, though the man could not understand the words. Watching her stirred something deep inside him. Memories he thought were buried forever came rushing back. The night his own child had cried for the first time. The way his wife had cradled their baby with the same look of fierce love, the way he had sworn to protect them, only to lose them too soon. A weight pressed on his chest. But this time it was not only grief, it was a strange pull. A voice inside whispering that maybe fate had given him a second chance. Not to replace what he had lost, but to protect what had come to his door. The alien mother's lips moved again. She tried to speak, her voice fragile, her words were strange. Broken syllables from a tongue he did not know. Yet the tone was unmistakable. It was the sound of someone pleading. The sound of someone saying, "Help me, please. Help us." The man leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You are safe here," he whispered. He knew she could not understand, but he said it anyway, hoping the warmth in his tone would carry the meaning across. The mother blinked, her eyes glistening, and then she nodded slowly. Pressing the baby tighter against her chest, time passed in silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the quiet breathing of the child. The man could see exhaustion pulling at her. Her eyelids drooped, her body sagged. Yet she fought against it, refusing to sleep, refusing to let herself relax. She feared, perhaps, that if she closed her eyes, he would turn them out into the night. He reached for the blanket draped over the chair and gently placed it across her shoulders. She startled at the touch, her glowing eyes widening. But when she saw his face, she stilled. She pulled the blanket around herself and the baby, then gave him a small nod. It was a tiny gesture, but in it was a world of trust. The man sat back, watching her. He wondered where she had come from, what had driven her to his door. How long had she wandered hungry and cold before reaching him? He could only guess, but he knew one thing: she had chosen him, of all people, to knock upon in her hour of desperation. That thought humbled him. It frightened him too. But it warmed something long frozen inside. The baby whimpered softly in her arms, and she rocked again, humming a faint tune. The melody was alien, the notes strange, but it carried the same comfort any mother would give her child. The man listened, and for the first time in years, his house no longer felt empty. It felt alive. It felt like a place where life was beginning again. The night dragged on. The wind outside howled against the windows. But inside, there was only warmth and the quiet bond of three souls drawn together by chance. The man leaned back in his chair, his eyes heavy, but his mind restless. He knew he had taken a step he could never turn from. He had allowed them into his home, and now their lives were tied to his. The alien mother's silent plea was clear. She had asked him without words to give her and her baby a chance to survive. And in the quiet of that cold night, he found himself answering without words of his own. He would protect them, whatever it cost. The night stretched long, and the man could not sleep. He sat near the dying fire, staring at the alien mother and her baby wrapped together under the blanket. The soft glow from her skin reflected against the wooden walls. Faint but steady, she had finally drifted into a restless sleep. But even in her dreams, her arms clung tightly to her child, as if letting go would mean losing everything. The man's heart wrestled with questions he could not escape. What was he doing? Why had he let them inside? What if the townsfolk discovered this? They would not see a mother and child. They would see danger. They would whisper about invasion, about threats. They would call him a fool for giving shelter. They might even take the aliens away. And he could not bear the thought of seeing this fragile pair dragged into the cold by rough hands. He leaned forward, pressing his hands together. His palms were rough, scarred by years of labor. His life had always been simple, predictable, ruled by rules and survival. But tonight was different. Tonight, his choices mattered. They mattered not only for him, but for the two lives depending on him now. The silent plea of the mother still echoed in his mind, her glowing eyes begging him not to shut them out. And the tiny cry of the child still lingered in his chest like a wound that would not close. For years he had lived alone, carrying the weight of grief like a stone around his neck. He had buried his wife and child, and with them he had buried the softer part of himself. He had told himself it was safer that way, safer to live without hope, safer to live without love. But here, before him, was a second chance he had never asked for. The universe had knocked on his door in the form of a starving alien mother and her helpless baby. Now it asked him for an answer. He stood and paced across the small room. The wooden floor creaked under his boots. His eyes shifted to the window where the night stared back at him. Outside was the world he knew, a world full of fear, suspicion, and rules. Inside was something fragile but alive, something that felt like it belonged. His chest rose and fell as he tried to decide which side of the door he belonged to. The baby stirred and whimpered. The mother's eyes snapped open. Alert even in her exhaustion, she sat up quickly, clutching her child close. Her eyes darted to the man, and he saw the fear return. She thought he had changed his mind, that he would cast them out. Her body tensed as if ready to flee. Though she had no strength left to run, the man raised his hand slowly. Palm open, not in threat but in promise. "No," he whispered. Though she could not understand the words, his voice was soft, steady. He shook his head gently and stepped closer. Her breathing slowed, and the fear in her eyes faded into something else, something cautious but hopeful. He crouched beside her and reached for the baby. She hesitated, but after a moment she let him hold the child again. The baby's eyes opened, dark and wide, staring up at him as though weighing his soul. The tiny hand reached out and touched his chin. That simple touch made his choice clear. The baby was no threat, no monster, only life in its purest form. He would not betray it. He could not. The man's mind was decided. He would keep them safe, no matter the cost. He knew what it meant to lies to neighbors, danger if anyone found out, hunger if his food had to stretch farther, loneliness turning into risk. Yet even knowing all that, he felt lighter than he had in years. It was as if a fire long buried inside him had begun to burn again. The alien mother watched him closely, her eyes filled with tears as if she sensed the choice he had made. She did not need words. She only placed her hand gently on his arm. Her touch trembling but warm. It was her way of saying she understood. Her way of saying thank you. He covered her hand with his own, nodding once, a silent promise between them. The baby gave a soft sigh and drifted back to sleep. The man rocked gently, his heart steady now. The fear had not vanished, but it no longer ruled him. Compassion had taken its place. His house no longer felt like a prison of silence. It felt like a refuge. He placed the baby back into the mother's arms and stoked the fire. The flames rose, casting their faces in golden light. He looked at them, two strangers who had become something more. His choice was no longer a question, it was an oath. He would stand by them, no matter what storms came. Outside, the wind howled against the door. But inside, the choice had been made. The human had opened his heart. And from that moment, there was no turning back. The morning sun crept slowly into the small wooden house, thin beams of light slipping through cracks in the shutters. The man rose early, as he always did, though this time he was not alone. The alien mother and her baby were still sleeping on the floor by the fire. Curled together beneath the blanket, the baby's tiny breaths rose and fell in rhythm, while the mother's glowing eyes flickered open now and then. Restless, afraid, but unwilling to close fully. She had not known true rest in a long time. The man moved quietly to the table, his eyes falling on the small piece of bread that remained. It was hardly enough for one person, let alone three, he sighed, rubbing his tired face. He had always lived on little, but now he would have to stretch that little even further. Yet when he turned and saw the fragile pair huddled together, he felt no regret. Hunger was a burden, but abandonment was a wound that never healed. He would share whatever he had. The fire had grown weak through the night. So the man gathered what he had left and stoked the flames. Warmth returned to the room slowly, chasing away the icy air that seeped through the walls. The alien mother stirred, her eyes opening fully now. She looked at him cautiously, her arms tightening around her child. The man gave her a small nod, not speaking, but showing her she was safe. She studied his face for a long moment before finally relaxing her shoulders. He tore the bread into two pieces, smaller than his hand. He pushed one piece gently toward her. The mother hesitated, staring at it as though unsure if it was truly meant for her. The man picked up his own piece and took a slow bite, then gestured for her to eat. Her lips parted, and for the first time, a faint sound escaped, a soft hum, almost like gratitude. She took the bread with trembling hands, broke off the smallest bit, and pressed it against the baby's lips. The child sucked at it weakly, a tiny noise of hunger filling the air. The man felt something twist inside him. A mix of sorrow and admiration, even in her own weakness. The mother gave her child the first bite. She ate only what remained. Small bites, as though savoring each crumb, her glowing eyes softened. And she gave the man a look that carried more meaning than any words. The man stood and walked to the old chest near the corner. He pulled out another blanket, worn but still warm, and placed it gently over them both. The mother touched the fabric with care, her fingers brushing it as though she had never felt such a gift before. She pulled it close, wrapping her baby tighter. A sigh escaped her lips, long and trembling. The man realized it was not only warmth she had found, but a brief escape from the fear that had followed her for so long. As the day grew brighter, the man busied himself with chores. He fetched water from the well, chopped wood, and repaired the loose shutters all the while. His thoughts circled back to the pair inside his home. He was not a rich man, not even a strong man anymore. But perhaps he could give them something more valuable than wealth. He could give them safety when he returned with the water. He found the mother sitting upright, the baby in her lap. She was rocking gently, her lips moving in a quiet hum. The tune was strange. The notes unlike any human melody, but it was soft and calming. The man paused at the doorway, listening. A warmth spread through his chest. It was not just a lullaby, it was hope. Hope whispered from a mother to her child. The baby's eyes closed, drifting into sleep. The mother looked up and met the man's gaze for the first time since arriving. Her lips curved slightly, not into a smile as humans knew it, but into something close. Something that spoke of trust. The man nodded back, silently promising again that she had nothing to fear as evening fell. The man prepared the small stew he had managed to make from leftover vegetables. He placed a bowl in front of her. She looked at it with wide eyes. Her hands trembling as she held it close, she tasted carefully. Then ate with a hunger that betrayed how long she had gone without food. Yet again, she fed the baby first, dipping her fingers and pressing the soft bits into the child's mouth. The man watched quietly, his chest tight. He remembered nights when his own wife had done the same, placing their child's hunger above her own. Those memories hurt, but they also filled him with strength. He realized now that shelter was not just walls and fire. It was the act of sharing, the act of caring, the act of making someone feel safe. When the meal was done, the baby slept soundly. The mother leaned against the wall, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. The man sat near the fire, watching over them. He knew danger could come at any time. From the outside world, from curious neighbors, from suspicion that grew like weeds in small towns. But for now, his house was warm. And in that warmth lived something greater than fear. He whispered to himself, words he had not spoken in years. "You're not alone anymore." He looked at the alien mother and her baby, fragile yet alive, and he felt the truth settle in his heart. The cold night had brought them to his door, but shelter and warmth would keep them alive. And in giving them both, he had unknowingly saved himself too. The days passed slowly, but each day was different now. The man's once silent home was no longer empty. The air was filled with soft, soundsteiny cries. The hum of a mother's lullaby, the faint rustle of movement by the fire. Life had returned to the old wooden house, and with it came change. At first, the alien mother had remained guarded. Every time the man moved too quickly, her glowing eyes sharpened with fear. Her arms clutched her baby tightly, as if she believed he might take the child away. But as hours turned into days, she began to watch him more carefully. She saw how he always placed food before her first, how he tended the fire through the cold nights, how he wrapped the baby in the warmest blanket. Never keeping it for himself, these small acts spoke louder than words. The man noticed the change too. The mother no longer pulled back when he entered the room. Her shoulders no longer stiffened when he came near. Sometimes, when the baby stirred in the night, she let him hold the child while she rested her tired arms. The baby, with wide, curious eyes, seemed to study the man as though sensing his heart. The child's small fingers wrapped around his, and the grip felt like a bond stronger than any promise. One morning, the man returned from chopping wood and found her standing near the table. She was trying to arrange the broken cups neatly. Her movements weak but careful. She glanced at him when he entered, her lips parting slightly, as if caught doing something wrong. But the man only smiled faintly and set the wood by the fire. She tilted her head, uncertain at first, then gave a small nod. It was the first sign that she wanted to help. Not only to survive, but to belong in the evenings. When the wind howled against the shutters, the man would sit by the fire, and the mother would sit across from him. At first, they shared silence, but slowly, she began to hum soft tunes to soothe her baby. The strange melodies filled the room with an unearthly beauty. The man listened quietly, his eyes closing sometimes, letting the sound carry him back to gentler times. Though he could not understand her songs, he understood what they meant: comfort, hope, love. One night, when the baby cried louder than usual, the man reached out his arms. The mother hesitated, but then handed the child over. The baby calmed in his arms, tiny eyes staring into his weathered face. The mother watched, and her expression softened into something new. Something that looked like trust. She no longer saw a stranger. She saw a protector. The man, too, felt something changing within him. For years, he had lived with a hollow heart, carrying only memories of what he had lost. Now, when the baby gripped his finger, or when the mother's eyes lingered with gratitude, that emptiness began to fill again. He did not understand why fate had chosen him, but he no longer questioned it. Still, fear lurked at the edges. When he went into town to fetch grain or supplies, he kept his lips sealed. He told no one about the mother and child hidden in his home. The people of the town were curious and suspicious. They whispered about strangers and danger, and he knew they would never understand. They would see a threat where he saw life, so he returned quickly each time. Praying no one followed him, back at home, the bond between them grew stronger. The mother began to copy some of his gestures. When he nodded, she nodded. When he pointed to the firewood, she lifted a piece to hand to him. Her lips tried to shape sounds like his, though her words came out broken. The man chuckled softly, shaking his head. But she only tried again. Her determination was quiet, but fierce. She wanted to bridge the distance between them. One evening, as the firelight danced across the walls, the man set down a bowl of stew. The mother took it with careful hands and then surprised him. She slid it halfway back toward him, insisting he share. Her glowing eyes met his, firm and unyielding for the first time. She was not only receiving, she was giving. He accepted, his chest tightening with something he had not felt in years: respect and partnership. The baby's laughter came one morning, clear and soft. The sound startled them both. The man looked up from his work, and the mother's glowing eyes widened with joy. They both leaned closer as the child giggled again, tiny hands waving. It was a moment so pure that the man found himself laughing too. A sound that felt strange in his throat after so long, but natural all the same. Trust had begun, not with words, but with actions. With shared hunger, with firelight, with the cries of a child, and the patience of two broken souls learning to mend. The man realized then that this was no longer just a shelter. It was becoming a home. The days of quiet safety did not last. Rumors in small towns always grew like weeds. A neighbor had seen the man returning from the woods with more firewood than usual. Another had whispered that he bought more grain than one man alone could ever need. Whispers became questions. and questions became suspicion. In a place where fear often ruled, people did not need proof to create a story. The man sensed it long before anyone spoke to him. In the marketplace, eyes followed him longer than they used to. Voices hushed when he walked past. Old friends no longer greeted him the same way. Some gave nervous smiles, others turned their backs. The air around him felt heavier each day. He carried his supplies quickly and returned home, always praying no one followed inside the small wooden house. Life was fragile but peaceful. The alien mother had grown stronger. Though she still looked frail, her glowing eyes had softened with trust. And she even attempted broken human words now and then. The baby was brighter too, giggling and reaching for everything. The man tried to hide his growing worry, but the mother noticed. Her eyes lingered on him with silent questions. She did not understand the town outside. But she sensed danger in his unease. The first knock came one cold evening. It was sharp, loud, and unfriendly. The man froze by the fire. The mother's arms tightened around her baby instantly. Fear flashing in her glowing eyes, he raised a hand to quiet her. Then went to the door. A neighbor stood outside, bundled against the cold, his eyes narrow. "You've been busy," the neighbor said. His tone, casual but edged. More wood, more food. More supplies than usual. His gaze slid past the man's shoulder as if trying to peer into the house. The man forced a smile, rough and tired. "Winter is harsh this year," he replied. "I prepare as best I can." The neighbor studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Of course," he said, though his voice held no real belief. Still, "It's strange." He stepped back, his boots crunching against the snow. "Strange times bring strange behavior." With that, he turned and walked away. The man shut the door quickly. Leaning against it with a heavy breath, the mother looked at him from across the room. Clutching her child, her lips trembled, her eyes asking silently what had happened. The man shook his head, trying to reassure her. "It's nothing," he whispered, but his heart knew it was not nothing. The town had begun to notice. Over the next days, more knocks came. Some asked harmless questions, others pried deeper. "Why don't we see you at the tavern anymore? Why do you keep to yourself these days?" Each time, the man gave excuses, but suspicion lingered in their eyes. The walls of his small home felt thinner with every visit. One evening, as the fire burned low, a group of townsfolk gathered outside. Their voices carried through the night, harsh and doubtful. The man peeked through the shutter and saw 3 of them standing in the snow, whispering to one another. Pointing at his house, his stomach twisted. He knew what they suspected. They thought he was hiding something. Inside, the mother rocked her baby, her eyes wide with fear. She had heard the voices too. She whispered softly in her strange tongue, pressing her forehead against the child's. The man walked to her side, his face hard but steady. "No one will take you," he said, even though she could not understand the words. His tone was enough. She looked at him, tears in her eyes, and nodded weakly. The next morning, the whispers grew bolder. A man at the marketplace muttered, "He's hiding something." Another added, "Maybe he's keeping one of them." Fear spread quickly. In towns like this, fear could turn to anger without warning. The man returned home with heavy steps. He set down the sack of grain and looked at the mother and her child. They were his secret, his burden, but also his family now. He could not betray them. Not even to save himself. The thought of handing them over to cold and cruel hands burned like fire in his chest. That evening, as the baby laughed at the flickering fire, the man sat quietly. His mind was torn between 2 worlds. One world was outside, full of suspicion and rules, demanding obedience and fear. The other world was inside, fragile but alive, filled with trust and warmth. For the first time in years, he realized he had something to protect, not just for himself, but for them. The town's reaction was clear. They would not understand. They would see danger where he saw hope. They would see strangers where he saw family. And so, the man made his choice stronger than ever. If the town came knocking, he would stand at the door and face them. He would not give up the mother or the child. As the night deepened, the voices outside faded. But the tension lingered in the air like smoke. The man looked at the fire. Then at the mother rocking her baby, he whispered to himself, "They are mine to protect now." It was not just defiance. It was truth, and no rumor, no suspicion. No angry crowd could break that vow. The nights grew longer. And the man knew the town's suspicion was not going away. Each day he felt more eyes watching him. Each word in the marketplace felt heavier, yet inside his home, something stronger than fear was growing. The alien mother no longer trembled every time he moved. She no longer clutched her child with desperate terror. Instead, she looked at him with trust, as if she believed he was more than just a stranger. He was their protector. Their family, the baby, had grown brighter too, laughing at the crackle of fire, reaching for the man's rough hands. Sometimes the man would hold the child in his arms and feel tiny fingers tugging at his beard. And in those moments, he felt alive in a way he had not since his own family was taken from him. The sound of laughter filled the cracks in his broken heart, patching it with something new, something he thought he would never feel again. But the outside world could not be ignored. One afternoon, as the man carried water from the well, he overheard two men whispering, "He's hiding them." "I swear it. Then we should tell the elders." His stomach twisted. He returned home quickly, his hands shaking. The mother noticed at once, her glowing eyes searching his face. He sat by the fire, staring into the flames, and finally spoke, though she could not understand. "They know," he whispered, "but I won't let them take you." That night, the tension reached its peak. Heavy knocks rattled his door. Loud and angry, voices shouted from outside, "Open up, show us what you're hiding." The baby woke and began to cry. The mother clutched the child tightly. Her body shaking, the man stood, his jaw clenched. For a moment, he thought of lying, of pretending, of sending them away into the night to save himself. But then he looked at the baby's face, the small, helpless eyes, and he knew his choice. He opened the door and stepped outside. The cold wind struck his face. A small crowd had gathered, torches in their hands. Suspicion burning in their eyes, one man shouted, "We know you're hiding something," another added. "It's dangerous, we won't have it in our town." The man stood firm, his voice steady. "What I have in my home is not danger," he said. "It is life. It is a mother and her child." The crowd gasped. Shocked at his open admission, murmurs spread quickly. Some voices angry, some uncertain. One woman whispered, "A child," her tone softer than the others. "They are not like us," one man shouted. "They bring nothing but trouble." The man's eyes blazed. "No," he said, louder now, "they are not trouble. They are hungry, they are cold. They are frightened, and they came to me for help. Would you turn away a starving child if it were human? Would you leave a mother to die in the snow?" His words cut through the night. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others lowered their torches. The truth in his voice struck deeper than their fear. The man stepped closer, his voice rising with emotion. "I have lived in this town my whole life. You know me. You know I am not a fool. I am not a traitor. But if being human means turning away those in need, then I would rather stand alone. Because real humanity is not fear, it is kindness." For a long moment, silence hung in the air. The torches crackled, the wind howled. The people stared at him, at the conviction in his eyes. Slowly, one by one, their anger dimmed. The woman who had spoken before stepped forward. Her voice soft but firm. "He's right," she said. A mother and child deserve compassion. No matter what they look like, the tension broke like ice on a thawing river. Some still muttered, still afraid. But the fire of anger had cooled. The crowd dispersed slowly, leaving only a few uneasy glances behind. The man stood there, his breath heavy, but his heart strong. He turned back into the house and closed the door. Inside, the mother's eyes were wide with fear. But when she saw him unharmed, her shoulders sagged with relief. He knelt by her side, placing a hand on hers. "You're safe," he whispered. She could not understand the words. But she understood his tone. Tears welled in her eyes. She pressed her glowing hand over his and nodded. The baby laughed suddenly, as if sensing the peace that had returned. The sound filled the room, and the man felt something inside him finally heal. He realized then that he had not only saved them, they had saved him too, in giving them shelter, food, and warmth. He had found back his own lost humanity from that day forward. The man knew there would still be fear. Still be whispers, but there would also be strength. The town had seen his choice, and though not all agreed, some had begun to understand. Humanity was not about who looked human, it was about who